Welcome. Today we look at how Europeans first interpreted what was to them a new world. Of course, it was all the result of a very big mistake. Christopher Columbus thought that he could find a shortcut to Asia, but he accidentally landed elsewhere, in lands long hypothesized and which Europeans called the Antipodes. As Europeans learned more about islands in the Caribbean, they assimilated new knowledge to the older knowledge found in old texts. It's not uncommon in history that myth gives rise to myth. So today, we'll look at how the Europeans first understood the Antipodes. And of course, we'll bust some myths along the way. By the late 15th century, there had long been speculation that other lands might exist that Latin-speaking Christians knew nothing about. It's an idea that goes back as far as ancient Rome. These lands were referred to as the Antipodes, and they were assumed to be islands. Having long been a source of speculation, the Antipodes were, thanks to Columbus, now a proven fact. But it was many decades before people realized that these lands were much more than islands. When Europeans built their big ships and went sailing, they had many ideas about what lived in the water below. One widespread belief was that sea monsters inhabited the deep. This included mermaids and mermen, merpeople if you will. There are, in fact, numerous surviving eyewitness accounts of merpeople sightings, which, admittedly, makes it very hard for us to know what people back then actually saw. But, however odd these beliefs, if you study them closely, you find that they do have internal coherence. For example, Europeans also feared a monster that they called the whirlpool. It was believed that whirlpools were caused by a giant fish that opened its mouth from the bottom of the sea and sucked everything into it. Obviously, such an explanation is not correct, but it does make a certain kind of sense. Europeans also had ideas about who and what lived elsewhere in the world. The more exotic the locale, the more exotic its inhabitants supposedly were. Collectively, these were known as the strange or monstrous races. The term race here does not denote skin color, but a kind of species. It's an idea that went back through the ancient Romans to the ancient Greeks. No one quite knows why or how this idea developed, but it was part of how Europeans understood their world. And we see that here. Some of these species are familiar. For example, the Cyclops. But I do not know about the dog-headed human, or about the headless person with a face in their chest and a mouth in their stomach. Nor can I tell you where the one-legged man with the giant foot originated. However, these alleged creatures populated any number of older texts, ranging from Viking tales of landing in North America to later works about global travel. And we see that here in an illustration from 1599 in Sir Walter Raleigh's The Discovery of Guinea, which is in modern-day South America. These ideas lasted for a very long time. There were many responses to Columbus's unexpected confirmation of the Antipodes. Some began calling the Antipodes the New World. The term New World comes from the 1511 work De Orbe Novo, which is Latin for On the New World. It was written by the Italian historian and geographer Peter Martyr of Angera. People took what they learned about this New World, and they assimilated new knowledge to old. But if this sounds odd or naive, hold on. All learning involves negotiating new information with older, accepted truths. Sometimes this presents no problem, although at other times it leads to confusion. And in the present case, it led to some creative rereadings of older texts. What Latin-speaking Christians believed about the world came from the texts that defined their culture. The most important of these was the Bible. Some early descriptions of the New World paint it as a kind of Eden, a paradise. Dutch explorers claimed that in New Netherland, that is, modern-day New York, there were so many fish in the local streams that you could just reach down and grab one. They described local fruit as ripe and delicious, and the trees themselves as beautiful. But this actually raises a difficult question. Were these literal descriptions? They seem so remarkable that you can't help but wonder. Perhaps these images were literary rather than literal. Perhaps they were intended to convey something glorious and good, but not factual truth. Columbus thought he had reached Asia. Others thought that they had found the Garden of Eden. But there was another popular theory too, and it concerned the lost city of Atlantis. The story goes like this. Long ago, Atlantis was an island in the Atlantic Ocean. Note the name. The word Atlantic comes from Atlantis. Atlantis was a great nation, but because of its hubris, it was punished by the gods and sunk into the sea. People wondered, what if the Antipodes were actually Atlantis? This might sound strange to us, but again, they took what they already knew and they used it to interpret new information. So, people looked to ancient texts, the Bible, Plato, or other authors, to try and understand where this new world, these Antipodes, had come from. But they also had to explain where its inhabitants came from. And so again, people turned to ancient texts. One popular theory was that the inhabitants of this new world came from Asia via a land bridge. But this still raised the question, who had they descended from? One popular theory was that they were the lost tribes of ancient Israel. Another theory was that they descended from Germanic tribes, especially the Celtic tribes. The theory of Celtic origins is especially interesting. Various Roman authors, such as Julius Caesar, had recorded information about the peoples that they met on their journeys. Several of these reports claimed that a Celtic tribe, the Picts, tattooed themselves. In the New World, some native peoples also tattooed themselves. Might correlation indicate causation? That is, might these people also be Picts or descended from them? Such were the speculations of the day, and we see it illustrated here. This picture dates from the end of the 16th century. The illustrators, John White and Theodore de Bry, depict here a female Pict, but she is drawn much like a Native American. Ancient literature defined what were, in the 16th century, modern assumptions. And so, as Europeans sailed, their knowledge of the world changed, and quickly at that. We see this most vividly when we look at maps. They quite literally illustrate the growth of knowledge. Here is what European peoples thought the world looked like in 1490. It's really pretty accurate. We see Africa, India, Europe, and Asia. There's no Australia, no Antarctica, and no North or South America. But the Earth, you'll note, is round, and the same is true here. This map comes from the Nuremberg Chronicle of 1493. Columbus first set sail in August 1492, and he returned the following March. But news of his voyage was probably unknown in German-speaking lands, and even if known, it wouldn't have affected this map, since on his first voyage he only sailed around the Caribbean. But just 10 years after Columbus's first voyage, things changed still more. We see here the outlines of North, but mainly South America. Of course, they had no idea that, in fact, there were two continents in the Western Hemisphere. And 5 years after that, we have this. North and South America look more like chains of islands than continents. It was not until the mid-16th century that the eastern coast of North and South America was fully charted. You'll note one thing here. The Waldseemüller map was the first to use the word America. But note that it appears as the label for what is now South America. So what? But even as the New World was interpreted through the prism of ancient myths, it also gave rise to new myths of its own. One of the longest lasting comes from 1516, Thomas More's great book, Utopia. which relates how Amerigo Vespucci allegedly discovered a previously unknown island called Utopia. Moore's dependence upon contemporary literature on the New World is further evidenced by this map. Today, words like utopia and utopian are familiar enough, but in Moore's time, the opposite held true, and that's because Moore invented the very word. The English word utopia derives from 3 Greek words. First are 2 homonyms, the prefix "u", which means happy or good, and the prefix "u", which negates whatever follows. Then comes the word topos, which means place. So, upon hearing the word utopos, or if you heard utopos, you wouldn't know which prefix the word began with. Was it utopos, meaning a happy and good place? Or was it utopos, meaning no place at all? So we have here a key ambiguity, but bring these 2 meanings together, and the word utopia means the happy place that is also no place. So, just as the New World was initially understood with reference to Atlantis or the Garden of Eden, it also inspired a new myth, that of an ideal political world. Moore recognized both the appeal and the folly of such idealism. And, after the horrors of the 20th century, we are just as likely to see every utopia as a disaster waiting to happen. But that hasn't prevented people from trying, in this case, not to discover a new world, but to create their own. If you're interested in learning more, these books are worth consulting. First is New World's Ancient Texts, The Power of Tradition and the Shock of Discovery by Anthony Grafton, April Shelford, and Nancy Serasi. It's just what it promises, an engaging analysis of how new information was assimilated to old. If you're interested in utopianism, there's no finer overview than Gregory Clay's work, Searching for Utopia, The History of an Idea. It's beautifully illustrated and a fine overview of the full sweep of utopian literature. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.